All right, actually, I switched over to Unsecure just recently, 3 weeks ago. But anyway, welcome guys. My name is Lindsey. I have a lot of development experience. I have run and built an application security program from the ground up. So today, I do a lot of interactivity. So I'm going to start with what I usually do. Show of hands, how many of you guys are developers? Okay, we got some developers, practitioners who run the security guys. Okay, some. The rest of you guys just kind of enjoy security? All right. Well, let's get started. So my introduction, we're going to talk about what we're doing. We're going to talk about common prompts because that's going to lead into us building our application on stage, writing software using AI. We're going to look at the generated code. We're going to go deeper with security, and then we'll talk final thoughts and then questions and answers. How many of you guys are Rush fans? Show of hands. All right. So you know this quote. If you choose to not decide, you still have made a choice. It's a great quote. I love it because if you choose to do nothing, it's still going to happen. All right, so why does this matter? So when you start looking at the number of tools and what your developers are doing, they're already going out and using AI-driven tools. Your developers, if you lock your environment down, they're just going to go home, feed the information into ChatGPT or whatever, get the information. It's happening. 76% of developers use development AI tools. Really, honestly, I think it's higher because a lot of the companies that I've spoken with, they say, actually, we think it's lower. And then you talk to the devs and they're like, oh yeah, I'm using X, Y, and Z, because they will slip tools into whatever. You could be running an extension on VS Code. You don't realize 3 lines of code later, it's talking to AI. 97% of developers have used AI coding tools at some point. That's true. And 40% of employers actively encourage and promote. And I think that's going to just do nothing but get higher. Google's plans are to start generating 25% of their new code through AI-driven, which will be interesting as we see the effects of building an application through AI. Gartner says that by 2027, 50% of code engineering with AI will be up, but the reality is we're already there. So let's talk quick prompting because really this kind of sets the stage. And we're going to talk about good common prompts. This is actually real good value type ways to get stuff. Now, there's a lot of information on the slides. The slides will be available, so you'll have them. So just basically be specific, supply examples. When you're looking at actually generating code, give it code examples. Otherwise, it's just going to pick somebody's random stuff and run with it. Provide data. Hey, I want you to create and talk to a database. This is what I'm looking for. When you provide the information, it knows and how to do it. And just provide what to do instead of what not to do because it's just better. Chain of thought programming. The new term apparently is called vibing. I learned that 2 weeks ago after I spoke. This guy came up and said, hey, were you vibe coding? And I'm like, what does that mean in my mind? And I'm like, sure, I think that's prompting. So that's there. Split your complex tasks into simpler ones, and you'll see us do a complex task, and you'll see the results. And understand that the results may be wrong, and you have to tell the model, hey, is this right? And that's something that a lot of people actually don't realize you can do. You can question the model and it'll come back. So let's do some basic prompting. So what I did, which I thought was fun, was I asked ChatGPT, Copilot, I asked all these guys, what prompts are common people doing for common tasks? Tell me what they're querying to get the information. So these are what not to do's, because a lot of these are very generic. Generate a basic C# .NET Core with CRUD operations, personal identity. You think that's good. And actually, that's the prompt I took that when I build my application, we're going to see. And you'll see the results of this. Controllers and routing, what people are doing. Hey, write C# web API controller. Great. What language? You're saying C#, but you're not given all the details. Create a DAO, which is great. Database integration, we're going to talk to a database. What are we doing? Do this for us. So these are the prompts that people are using to generate code. And validation, add validation to your program, which actually is a great thing if you've played with it. It does a good job at building, some basic testing validation steps, which actually is not bad. And again, documentation. All right, let's talk about better ways to prompt. That was just the common. So I asked, well, what's a better way to do it? And these are some enhanced. Generate a React front end that does the CRUD. That's actually better because now you're giving it a framework, you're giving it some information to work off of. Set up an Angular application. Create a simple Vue.js application. So this builds into better results, not adding too much more than what was there before, but just these little tidbits of change make the difference. Fetching data from the AI, write a React. Here we go again. Generate Angular service. So we're now telling the system what we're looking for, what we're aiming for. And then we have state management, authentication and security, because that's important, error handling, feedback, tables, pagination, so on. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna generate an entire application, API backend with C#, .NET Core. We're gonna build this and we're gonna build it securely. Then we're gonna build a front end that will talk to the back end, all through prompting. So I will start off with, I was going to use ChatGPT because everybody knows ChatGPT, but when you run ChatGPT and it gives you results like this, you're like, what? I asked it for create a .NET Core API backend with CRUD, create, read, update, delete, talk into a database, and we'll see the actual query here in a minute. And what it did is it only gave me the get. It did not give me the rest of the CRUD. And then I asked it, well, would you please update this and add error handling for me? Try, catch, the basics. It said, sure. So then it got rid of my get and gave me a add person. I never asked it for the add person. So what ChatGPT was doing here, who knows? And because of that, forget it. We're not going to go ChatGPT. What we're going to do is we're going to use Claude. And this is a little bit more of the code. And it was just like, what are you doing? It was weird. So I call it the drunk model because it just threw stuff out. All right, so we're going to use Claude 3.7. The reason why is because Claude 3.7, I equated to, and we'll see this here in a few minutes, to a senior developer who just simply doesn't understand security. And we'll see that here in a minute. So these are the actual prompts I use. You can take this, you can feed it into the system. When you get home with the slide deck, you'll be able to see everything that we're going through here. We're going to generate a basic C# .NET Core application with CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations. We're going to create a person entity. So first name, last name, address, phone number, the basics. And when we're done, we'll look at the first one and we'll ask, what are we missing? And I'm just going to share the answer here, role-based access, validation, a lot of stuff, and we'll see. And then we'll ask it, what security issues do you see with what you generated? Which it's interesting because we didn't ask it to write secure software, but it actually did a fairly decent job, but it finds things. And it's going to come back and it's going to say, we found these things. Then we'll say, well, will you fix it for us? Sure. So it fixes. And then we're going to turn around and ask it again, well, is this secure? And again, it comes back and says no. The reason why this is important is when you start thinking about what your developers are doing at your company, they're just grabbing this stuff and they're running with it. Do they understand what they're looking at? Your junior devs who are your interns for the summer, who are just graduating, are actually heavily using ChatGPT and some of the other systems out there to generate code. And that's a problem, and we're about to see why. So when I ran it, we generated a basic app, and so here we go. We've got a pretty decent structure. It picked an old framework, 7.0. Don't know why it picked 7, not 8 or 9. It gave us some dependencies. I will share with you now, these dependencies don't necessarily actually work with that target framework. I know this because when I took it, built it, and tried to get it to run, it was arguing with me. So the next step, let's take a look at the person model. Again, this is out of Claude. It gave us the requireds, it gave us string lengths, it gave us some good basic starting points to work from. You didn't get any of this kind of stuff out of ChatGPT, by the way. It was like, here's some code. So we're looking at the person model. We've got some pretty good starting points, right? Then we look at the DTOs, data transformation objects, and we have a pretty decent start. Again, required string lengths, everything out there. Not bad, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the controller. So the controller, we're going to look at the controller. We're going to look at the stuff, and as we look at it, it created the HTTP gets. It gave us some decent code. It actually did some the basic good stuff that you would start with. It gave us the gets. It gave us the creates. It gave us the adds. It gave us the whole CRUD. I didn't have to say, please give me the rest. It actually gave us the CRUD and did a decent job. Now we're still missing some things. We don't have our error handling here, and we don't have all of it, but we do have a good start to our application. So let's take a look at the app settings. When you're writing software, you do web config, app config. If you're really doing it right out of the gate, you're actually going to a secrets manager and you're tied in. But this is okay. This is a good start for a database. We're gonna, for development, we're gonna tie to a local database, and here we go. So I thought this was kind of decent that it actually gave you even the connection string to get started with, at least a good starting point. So it gave us good project structure. So talking about Claude, it didn't just give me one file or two files like ChatGPT did. It actually broke this down into separate pieces. So again, when we're looking at the quality of the development, this is why I say Claude is kind of like a senior developer. Senior developer will break it out into pieces and actually kind of make it work. All right, so we're gonna ask, thank you for giving us code. What security issues do you see with this? What's missing? And let's make it more. And it came through, and like I said, it's not wrong, but it actually said, hey, look, there's no authentication mechanism. There's, implement JWT tokens. I mean, that's really kind of a given. That is a basic starting point. Input validations, missing, your header stuff. I mean, some of the stuff you would normally expect out of the system, but others it actually did, which was actually decent. So we asked, we received. Please secure our code, please do this. So it went through and it actually built everything, did the changes that it said, hey, we have this stuff. Which this is a great starting thing for your developers to do. Hey, if they generated code that was generated, you can ask it, but don't upload code and look at your company policies before doing it. But if it generated code, you can ask the code that was generated, are you secure? That way, you're not uploading any intellectual property. All right, so we have an auth controller. We have a try catch. We didn't ask it for try catch, but it added it. So, which is great because this is really the right way to do things. You're not gonna just build stuff without it. It even thought about using secrets. Hey, we should use a key store. Here's Azure. Here's a good starting point. If you're using Azure, great. You could be a little bit more specific and say, hey, could you switch this over to an AWS secrets manager or something? And it would. All right, so here we're gonna say, hey, let's build this. So it comes back and says, hey, I fully secured the .NET Core application per your request. And here is the file over here. And oh, by the way, here's some additional things that I didn't consider, but you should think about. Again, from Claude, this is actually not bad out of the gate, 3.7. So when you're actually talking to your developers and you get back on Monday, say, hey, you should look at Claude 3.7, get rid of the ChatGPT. So again, this was actually kind of neat. It created even like health checks. So things that you wouldn't think about normally out of the box unless you were a senior developer. So it built the authentication and authorization, and it kind of gives us some of the detail of what it did. It added endpoints, it added validation and cross-site script protections. It did our security headers, and it gave us what kind of headers it did. So it actually does a decent job at actually giving us stuff to work with. The key files that it actually updated. So now we know the key aspects of what it did. And so I was pleasantly surprised. I was, like I said, pleasantly surprised. So we come back in, we ask it again. What security issues do you have with this? You made the changes, you did the fixes. Is there anything more? And so it comes back and it says, actually, there are. Why didn't it do it the first time? I don't know. But so it did. It came back and said, hey, remaining, we still have secrets management. We did some, but we didn't do it all. Token security, hey, we need some expiration date on the tokens. That makes sense. We have input validation, auditing, monitoring. It actually thought of additional things, but again, why didn't it do it at the beginning? So when we're working with our developers, the big question becomes, when they're just throwing stuff in and saying, hey, I need this code, think about this kind of stuff that comes out of the system. It even gave us code examples, code snippets, which is great because maybe you don't want to implement the whole thing and say, blindly go fix all this. You may say, hey, I just want to do parts and pieces. And so for those who have developed, we use Stack Overflow and we use those tools in the past. We Google our way through things. So we get our code snippets like we had there. So you could decide, do I want to do something with it or should I just let it fix it all? It even came in and said, hey, your dependency vulnerabilities, email security. So it actually did a decent job at thinking things through. And it even says, hey, by addressing these, you're going to have more. So again, I said, hey, please secure the code. Give us, fix this, right? Let's not just talk about it. Let's actually fix it. And so we're going to get a fixed result. So let's take a look at this audit service. For those who have heard me talk about logging, I talk about this all the time on APIs. I have APIs that have never been breached after, well, I say 15 years, but now it's really like 17, 18. They've never been compromised. And the big thing is validation, logging, and other stuff that if you do it right, you're going to have a nice secure environment. And one of the things that I push is when you log the inbound IP address. Because the last application I was in charge of was a medication prescribing system. And if it's based out of Atlanta, the doctor group, and somebody logs in at, let's say, 9 o'clock, and somebody logs in at 9:07 in California, this isn't Star Wars. They're not transporting across. They could possibly be using some kind of VPN system, but the reality is they shouldn't be using a VPN with that kind of stuff. So either somebody used their login at the office and they're traveling, but the reality is this gives you a lot of information on what's happening behind your system, and it actually really helps benefit the SOC when you need to actually do stuff. It updated the people controller. Now, HTML encoder encode on the back end, show of hands, should we ever do that on the API? Thank you, because you don't. Because when you encode it on the back end, anything that's a B2C, C2B, to your API, it's going to get the encoded data, which is going to break the systems, upstream, downstream, everywhere. You absolutely don't want to do that because that is just a no-no. You fix it on the front end. Why it fixed on the back? Anyway, but again, if your developers don't know what they're doing, guess what? They're just going to copy and paste it and run with it. All right, so let's look here. We asked it, hey, it came back and it gave us the validation. All right, would we ever do that for a stored procedure? Would we ever go through and say, hey, here's our SQL command. Would you go validate for us if it looks janky or wrong or someone's trying to do something malicious? No, because we would use command parameterization when we're talking to store procs or the database. You would never do this. Again, bad security habits out of the system, but at least it thought about it. All right. So now we're going to come in and we're going to say, please do it. So now it comes back and said, all right, I've implemented the changes. I've got the changes for you. So I've enhanced the authentication. It said we did JWT token updates. We came through, we improved our validation, which I don't think the SQL injection validation was right because, again, you would never do that. It secured our configurations, it worked on our headers, it did more infrastructure, and then it actually gave us the details of what it did. So the nice part is with the Claude, it's giving you decent code and it's even telling you what it did so at least you know, and you can document it in your JIRA tickets or whatever they're working with so that way they'll have it. So, all right, now I asked at the end, can you provide the application? Claude won't. But it'll give you all the text boxes, or these boxes that you click on it, and you'll get the code just like you see here, and as you saw as we're going through. So having that information, you'll have to just click on each one and download it manually, but you'll have it. We'll get to more of that here in a minute. So let's talk about front end, right? So we're going to say these are the 3 inputs that we're going to give, the 3 prompts. Generate a front end based on what you just created. So it knows what the back end is. It knows the information that it had. So let's build it. Let's go with it. I want the same language. And again, we're going to ask what security issues did you find? It's going to come back and say, hey, same thing, token storage, missing CRS, weak credential, just a lot. And we're going to ask, please secure. And again, we're going to go round robin, but not as many times. So we get the same structure. So it builds it. Again, it actually used a framework 7. Again, we have dependencies that are not compatible with that, which again was interesting. MVC models, the back end, it auto-configured this to a minimum of 12, but it created the front with 8. So this is on the password is required. It must be at least 8 according to the front, but when it generated the code for the back, it actually created it as 12, which I thought was interesting because that's actually decent. 8 is okay, but why did it create 8 on the front and it has 12 on the back? So now when your developers are looking at the context of what's in there, again, it doesn't have the full context or it forgets. So these are things that you just have to be aware of. Now, I asked it big tasks. You would never ask it to really build a whole application like this, but it's a good example. All right, so API services, right? So this is the code it generated. There's no validation on the back end for this to ensure that the person being updated. So the basic RBAC, role-based access, ignored on the back end. We could have asked for it, but we didn't. But the reality is some of the things that are more advanced, it doesn't think about, it didn't do, it just simply gave us code. So we just have to be careful. All right, people view. This is not a way to do cross-site scripting. It kind of is, but it's not really the right way because you can still do cross-site scripting even with that. And that is basically, hey, the display name for, you'll see this in the slide deck when you see it, because it is kind of small for you guys. But basically, it just says, this method is used to retrieve and display, model property. However, it does not inherently provide protection against cross-site scripting attacks. So again, your junior developers, your guys may or may not have a clue what they're seeing, and they're going to run into this. All right, so now I'm going to run the video. Okay, so generate a front-end web application that ties in. And again, this is the structure. And again, these are the files that it will generate, and it did a great job. This generated, just so you guys know, 80,000 lines of code between the back end and front end. For a simple CRUD application that's a simple API doing just simple database stuff. 80,000 is a lot. And again, we got our requireds, and it did some things, but it didn't do tons of the security out of the gate, because we're going to have to ask it again, hey, would you please create security? And the reason why you see the continue is we actually exceeded its memory with the size of the application. But these are the files that it created. But again, it's kind of nice. It created the separates, the login, the update, the create, the the delete, all the different aspects. So it did a pretty decent job at splitting this out like a senior developer. That's why I said Claude is like a senior developer, because that's really kind of how they thought. It created the complete front end. So now we have a complete front end and a back end. Simple, getting out of the gate type stuff. And it's given us, hey, what kind of stuff is wrong with this? And again, this is what it's given us is, the things that it missed. Again, it's going to be the same thing. We'll find here in a minute. Okay, so what security issues do we see? So we get our security issues. 1 second. I can't remember if this is. All right, here we go. So we're going to ask it, what security issues do you see? Again, we're going to just kind of repeat the same thing and get the information. So the content security policies are missing. And we're not going to go through the whole cycle multiple times. We just kind of hit it the first time and said, hey, what's missing? Even though it knew that we were doing secure stuff, it actually added some of the security stuff on the front end that we didn't ask for, that had the back end. And so we're going to see the code snippets again. And then after we get the code snippets, we're still going to do the same thing. We're going to ask it, hey, would you please give us, fix this whole thing for us, and we'll actually get the code completed here in a minute. Now, the original plan was to actually do this live on stage, but it took, through the prompting, 45 minutes to actually get it. So it exceeded the time. That's why I did it this way. But the nice part is it even added a password strength meter, session timeout warning. So it's actually thinking through a lot of things. Again, more like a senior developer, and that's why I kind of equated it to that. And I'm just kind of tooling through the different code and just kind of showing you at a high level some of the stuff that it came up with. So it did the API calls, it did the connection stuff right, and it actually did a fairly good job at doing the basics. Okay, so we're gonna say, all right, go fix it. Is it wise to go out for a style sheet, a dependency, to something that's external outside of your system? No. At least you got the URL to copy it in. And just so you know, the integrity ID that's tied to this is not actually right. So it even was like, hey, guess what? We're gonna give you this thing. We're gonna show you that it's right and secure. We're gonna do all the right things and then give you wrong data. But hey, at least it thought about it. But seeing this as a developer, and if you're running the development team, you could at least say, hey, copy that down, make it local, review the code, and then just make it part of the whole process. All right, so the following prompts, and we're not gonna actually build it, but if you want to, you can take all the code that was generated from running these prompts, and you'll get a solution that's at the end. So let's review the code real quick. Findings, it's more like Transformers because there's a lot more that meets the eye. Where the rubber hits the road. So you can't expect GPT systems to write your application for you. It's good at code snippets, but it's not good at the whole big picture. Every GPT system that we tested, which we used Copilot, we used Claude 3.7 and ChatGPT, there was others, but this is where I kind of landed on. They created code that looked good in pieces. They generated Unsecure code, and you could ask it time and time again. We saw that even after multiple attempts. ChatGPT acted like a drunk coder. However, the code did compile, which is, I can't say that about the others. Claude is like a senior developer that hasn't been trained on security. It tries its best, still falls short. Copilot, if you get it, you get code that looks right, but good luck, because it won't compile, it won't do anything. So with Claude, here's the results. I took the files. I actually had to go back to Claude because it did not give me all the files. So I said, hey, would you please create these additional pieces for me, because I didn't get them. There were 78 plus errors when it first loaded. I sat down and I was just sitting trying to fix them. Again, I kept running into the, hey, for this version of your, the libraries that you're tied to and the framework, they're incompatible. I was sitting there trying to fix it, and I finally just gave up and I said, it's just no. So just be aware, if you're trying to do big bangs, you're not gonna get the big bang results that you're expecting. All right, so GPT can only take you so far, but how about security tools? And we'll just blow through this. So we said, hey, create these securely, create these securely, create these securely. Guess what? It didn't. We still have JWT expirations. We have mass assignment vulnerabilities. We have findings. So when you're using GPT to create and ask it to go secure your code, it does a decent job, but you still want to run enterprise security tools at the end to ensure that you're actually secure. So don't skip that step. You can't assume a GPT system's gonna do everything for you. And it goes on, and there are lows in our system because some of the stuff just isn't tied in yet because I didn't fix all the bugs. But anyway, they're there. All right, so hold on. What does ChatGPT have to say about comparing ChatGPT against an enterprise application? So let's ask it, because I thought that would be just kind of a fun thing to do. So enterprise security tools like SAST, DAST, SCA are significantly better at finding vulnerabilities than AI coding assistants like ChatGPT, Copilot, or Claude, and here's why. And it was actually really kind of nice seeing the analysis, because it really does just kind of say, look, don't assume that the GPT systems are going to do everything for you, because they're not. They will only get you so far, but you still have to get across the finish line yourself, that last mile. Security tools, here's the pros and the cons, and I'll let you guys read this after, because there's a lot to it. Code-based coverage, again, the enterprise security tools are better. False positives, false negatives. Again, you're going to get a lot of results just depending on what the GPTs were trained on. Now, you do have private LLM models that people are building for this kind of thing, and they are much better, but you still run into hallucinations when you run into smaller models. Your security specific, again, your software is going to be designed to look for things, regardless of what enterprise tool you're using. They're going to be better than the GPT. And the regulatory compliance, you need that checkbox for some companies, and they're not going to accept Copilot as your security vendor. Well, maybe if you're using their advanced security stuff. But anyway, so the final thoughts, there's no magic bullet when it comes to development in AI. Human intervention is key, so the human in the loop. Again, senior tech reviews, when the code's coming in, make sure you're asking who wrote this code, because if it was through a GPT system, you want to ensure that you do additional looks and things on it. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. So just because you can use GPTs to do things for you doesn't necessarily mean it. Old school style development still sometimes actually is good. Questions and answers.